Hello there, my sleepy travelers. Come closer, now. Nestle into your pillows and pull your blanket just a bit higher as we drift together into a quiet corner of Middle Earth. The moon is high above the hills, casting its silver gaze over the peaceful Shire, where the round doors of hobbit holes glow warmly from within, and the soft murmur of wind through the ivy whispers stories forgotten by time. Tonight, our tale begins not with a grand battle or thunderous storm, but in the stillness of twilight, where the stars begin to wake and the earth hushes itself in reverence. This is a story of the Istari, the 5 great wizards sent across the sea in ages past. You may know them by name: Gandalf the Grey, Saruman the White, Radagast the Brown, and 2 more, cloaked in the colors of twilight and eastward shadow. But this night is not of their triumphs. It is of a quiet, mysterious fall, a fading of power, a changing of seasons, and the secrets that still lie buried beneath ancient leaves and silver starlight. Now, close your eyes, dear one. The journey begins. Before we drift too far beneath the velvet skies of Middle Earth, let me gently share what lies ahead on our quiet journey tonight. This tale, my sleepy travelers, is one of mystery wrapped in memory, of a fading power that once moved quietly through forests, over mountains, and across time. You've heard of Gandalf the Grey, wise and wandering, who became Gandalf the White after his passage through shadow. Perhaps you've heard whispers of Radagast, who spoke to birds and beasts more than to men, and even Saruman, once noble, whose fall echoed in stone and fire. But there were others. 2 of them vanished into the east, wrapped in azure cloaks and unanswered questions. Tonight, we walk a soft path behind their footsteps, not to disturb their silence, but to listen for what remains in the hush. What did it mean for the Istari to fall? Was it a battle lost or a destiny fulfilled? Did they fail in their task, or simply slip beyond the memory of Middle Earth? As we move gently through this story, you'll hear the rustle of old parchment, the song of distant stars, and the quiet groan of trees that remember more than they say. You'll sit with a hobbit who watches for shooting stars from the crest of a hill, and you'll feel the soft hum of magic that lingers in the earth, tired perhaps, but never truly gone. If you find comfort in this journey, if the voice of ancient forests and the whisper of forgotten lore settles you into rest, do consider joining us again. There are many stories in Middle Earth, each more delicate and strange than the last. And now, dear listener, take a deep breath. Feel the night surround you. Let your thoughts quiet and your heart slow. The tale is waiting, gentle, patient, and ready to unfold. Let us walk into it together, in a quiet corner of the Shire, not far from the soft bubbling of the water, and beneath the leaning arms of a willow tree, lived a hobbit named Barrelac Bramblefoot. He was not famous, nor particularly adventurous. He wore coats of mossy green and deep brown, the colors of earth after rain, and walked slowly along the hedgerows with a hand behind his back, as if he had all the time in the world, which for a hobbit was often true. His round face was gentle, his eyes the color of sweet tea left in sunlight, and his curly hair had a streak of gray that shimmered like silver in the dawn. Bearlac was fond of quiet things. The sound of ink scratching on old parchment, the smell of apples baking in the oven, and the warm weight of a good book in his lap on rainy days. Yet, unlike most hobbits, he kept a small collection of peculiar items in his study, odd tokens found on forest walks, ancient buttons, and feathers that shimmered just slightly too much. He did not know where most of them came from. He only knew they felt important, as though they had waited a very long time to be picked up again. Bearlac had always been drawn to stories not told in full, half-remembered songs, tales that ended with a question, or names that no one else in the Shire could recall. He had once asked old Hamfast about the Blue Wizards, and Hamfast had simply blinked at him, saying, "We don't talk much about them, lad. Never did." Lately, Bearlac had begun to walk farther from home, up the hill paths no one used anymore, into groves where the air smelled older than it should. He didn't know what he was looking for, only that a strange restlessness had crept into his bones. It wasn't worry, or even longing, more like the memory of something forgotten. A whisper that returned at twilight, when the world grew still. In the evenings, he would sit outside his round window, legs tucked under a patchwork blanket, sipping tea with honey and reading aloud to himself. But sometimes, just sometimes, he would pause mid-sentence, eyes gazing westward across the downs, as though he heard a voice on the breeze, one that didn't quite belong to the Shire. It is through Bearlac's eyes, dear listener, that we begin to see the fading echo of the Istari, the 5 wizards sent to Middle-earth in ages past, now shadows in story, their power scattered like dandelion seeds on the wind. Tonight, their memory stirs, and Bearlac, quiet and unassuming, may be the only one left who hears it. Bearlac Bramblefoot's days began, as they always had, with the soft gurgle of his kettle and the earthy scent of steeping tea leaves. Morning light filtered through round windows rimmed with ivy, casting golden pools on the wooden floor of his hobbit hole. The Shire was at peace. Outside, bees hummed over blooming wildflowers, and the wind moved gently through the trees like a sigh half-remembered. The kind of sigh you only hear when the rest of the world has gone still. Each day unfolded with the gentle rhythm of an old song. Bearlac tended to his garden in the early hours, crouched beneath the curling tendrils of pea vines and humming softly as he worked. His fingers were quick and kind, teasing weeds from between the carrots and brushing dust from ripening tomatoes. Birds sang overhead, and he always left crumbs out for the shy robin who had taken to visiting his windowsill. After a slow breakfast, often something warm and filling, like blackberry porridge or toasted seed bread, he would retreat to his study. The room smelled of wax and parchment, and light from the window dappled the shelves, which overflowed with books both old and curious. Some were well-loved tales of the Took ancestors and pipeweed lore. Others were older still, their spines stiff with age, their words written in curling Elvish or firm Dwarvish runes. Bearlac could not read them all, but he liked the way they felt in his hands, like time, bound in leather and dust. He kept a journal by the hearth where he noted small observations. The way the clouds moved differently one morning, the unexpected appearance of silver moss near the Brandywine River, or dreams that faded with the sunrise but left behind a feeling that clung to the heart like dew on grass. It was a simple life, and yet, lately, the familiar patterns of his days had begun to ripple. It started with the flowers. One morning, Bearlac noticed that the moonvine in his garden, normally a night bloomer, had opened its silver petals at dawn, glowing faintly despite the sun. The sight had made him pause, trowel half whispered to the soil. He crouched and stared, watching the pale blossom shimmer with a soft internal light. When he leaned in close, he thought, just for a moment, that he could hear it hum, a low, gentle sound, like a memory trying to take shape. He said nothing to anyone. The Shire was not a place for peculiarities. The gaffers at the Green Dragon already thought Bearlac was too fond of strange tales and old nonsense. But the next morning, it happened again, this time with the lavender. Its color deepened to an otherworldly blue, and the scent, normally mild, was so strong it made his head swim, like breathing in dreams. He wrote it in his journal, "Something is changing, not wrong, not frightening, just different, like the world is remembering something it hasn't spoken of in a long while." One afternoon, while wandering near the edges of Binbole Wood, Bearlac found an old stone, half buried in moss. It was smooth and oval, carved with faint lines that reminded him of stars. Not constellations as he knew them, but older ones, unfamiliar and somehow heavy with meaning. He held it in his palm for a long time. It was warm to the touch, though the breeze was cool. He brought it home and placed it on the mantel. From then on, the wind changed. It began to carry with it strange scents, like the spice of faraway deserts or the salt of forgotten seas. Sometimes, when Bearlac sat by his window with tea in hand, he thought he could hear whispers, barely audible, tucked within the rustling of the trees. They didn't speak in words he knew, but in emotion, tones that made his chest ache and his eyes sting for no reason he could name. He started walking farther each evening, past the green lanes and into the meadows that rolled like waves under the moonlight. Once, as twilight deepened and stars appeared in the hush of night, he found himself standing atop a hill he didn't remember climbing. From there, he could see the whole curve of the Shire, small and still and golden. Yet beyond it, to the south, a darker shape loomed, the forest of the old tales. Greenwood the Great, or what they now called Mirkwood. Bearlac didn't know why, but his eyes lingered there. And in that silence, the word Istari came to his lips, not spoken aloud, but breathed into thought like an old spell. He didn't know where it came from. He only knew it didn't come from him. That night, sleep would not find him easily. He sat up by the fire, the stone from the woods warm again in his hand. The shadows flickered on the walls, painting shapes that almost moved, one tall and staff-bearing, another cloaked in blue. He remembered stories from long ago, whispered at the edges of childhood, of the gray pilgrim who once walked the roads, of the brown wizard who vanished, of others never named, but always present in the fold of ancient legend. And suddenly, he realized that no one had spoken of them in years. No songs were sung of Radagast or LOTR, no stories told of Palando or even Gandalf since his final departure. Their names had slipped from memory like mist in the morning, forgotten, not because they didn't matter, but because something wanted them to be. Bearlac stood, the stone clasped tightly now, and whispered, "Why did they fall?" The fire crackled, and in that small sound, he heard a whisper of wind rise along the chimney. It was colder than it should have been, not unpleasant, but ancient, a draught of breath from the west. The next morning, when Bearlac walked to the market, the road seemed different. Not in shape or scent, but in feeling. The birds were quieter, the sun shone softer, and the people, they looked the same, but they moved as if in a dream, smiling politely, nodding, laughing. But Bearlac could tell they did not see the same world he now did. Something had opened in him, and he could not close it. He stopped by the Brandywine Bridge and looked into the water. For a brief moment, his reflection shimmered, then changed. A long-bearded man, robed in gray, flickered on the surface beside him, staff in hand, eyes full of stars. And then, just as quickly, it was gone. Bearlac did not speak of it. Not that day, not for many days. But he began walking toward the old forest more often, and each time the wind whispered a little more clearly. The wizards had not been lost, not truly. Something still remembered them, and perhaps so could he. Bearlac Bramblefoot did not go looking for magic. Not in the way the great folk did, anyway. Not with grand adventures or sword-sworn oaths. In truth, he would have told you plainly that he was much more at ease with teacups than tomes, and more fond of fresh-baked scones than forgotten spells. But ever since he found the warm stone beneath the moss, ever since the name Istari whispered itself into his thoughts, like a breath-riding wind, something had begun to change. Not abruptly, not rudely. It crept in as twilight creeps upon a summer hill, soft and subtle, casting the world in gentler shadows. The first of these quiet encounters came not long after a gentle evening rain. The garden still smelled of soaked earth and wild mint, and the air was rich with that fresh, green scent of rain retreating. Bearlac had gone walking, as was his growing habit, along the lesser paths behind his home, the ones that skirted old trees and half-remembered stone fences from the days before the brandybucks mapped the hills. That evening, the clouds above were thinning, breaking open to a lavender sky dappled with the first stars. He paused near an ancient tree, gnarled and hollow at its base, when he noticed something unusual. The fireflies had gathered, but not as they usually did, dancing wildly and scattering at the sound of boots. No, this time they moved with peculiar grace. A slow spiral of golden light hovered above the grass. They did not flee his presence. Instead, they hovered in a pattern, circular, rhythmic, as if drawing a symbol too faint for the eye to grasp. Bearlac knelt slowly, careful not to disturb them. And then he saw it. Beneath the glowing dance, in the center of the swirling lights, a single feather rested on the moss, long, white, and faintly luminous. He picked it up gently. The moment his fingers brushed it, a sound rose in the quiet. Not loud, not frightening, just a tone, a clear note, like the hum of a distant crystal bell. It rang not in the air, but deep within him, as if his bones remembered a song they had never sung. The feather was impossibly soft. It didn't belong to any bird he knew. It shimmered faintly, almost as though it remembered the stars. He placed it in the inner pocket of his coat. The wind stirred the trees, and again he heard it, faint and melodic, like a voice half caught in dream. It was not words, but it was calling. From that evening on, the world leaned closer. Bearlac began to notice how the leaves rustled in ways that resembled speech, not frantic or wind-wild, but deliberate, almost musical, like verses being rehearsed in an ancient tongue. Sometimes, when he sat beneath the hilltop tree at dusk, the branches seemed to sway in time with his breath. And once, while sitting on a flat stone by the Brandywine, the river itself rippled in patterns, concentric circles that pulsed outward, then folded inward again, as if responding, and yet he felt no fear, only wonder. There was a night, not long after, when he dreamt of silver towers. He was walking through a place of light and air, columns of stone wrapped in ivy and mist, the ground beneath his feet humming faintly with power. In the dream, he wore a cloak of blue, not quite royal, but soft and flowing, edged in stars. He carried a staff, not for battle, but for memory. When he touched it to the earth, flowers grew where none had before. He woke with the scent of lavender on his pillow. As curiosity bloomed, so too did the land begin to show him paths he had never seen. There was a trail, hidden behind the thickets past Bramblebank, that he could have sworn had never been there. It was narrow, lined with old trees whose trunks bore faded marks, circles and sigils that looked more elvish than hobbitish. The leaves above whispered, and the air grew cooler. Not cold, but hushed like a room holding in his breath. He followed it one evening, just as twilight dipped low. The path led to a small glade, round as a ring and quiet as snowfall. At the center stood a standing stone, half covered in ivy, and upon it glowed a faint inscription. Bearlac traced it with his fingertips, not reading the language. He couldn't, but feeling it. The moment he touched it, a breeze passed through the glade. The feather in his pocket stirred, and before him a figure appeared, not suddenly, not dramatically. One moment there was nothing. The next, the figure stood just at the edge of sight, a silhouette robed in long gray garments, a staff gently resting in one hand. He did not move. He only watched. Bearlac blinked, not in fear, but awe. "I dreamed of you," he whispered. Though he hadn't meant to speak, the figure inclined his head, only slightly, and raised a hand as if in greeting. His presence was quiet, steady, and oddly familiar, like remembering a lullaby sung long ago by someone now gone. Then, without warning, the figure turned and walked away, into the trees. Bearlac hesitated for a heartbeat, then followed, but when he stepped beyond the glade's edge, the figure had vanished. Only the scent of pipeweed lingered, faint and comforting. The next day, Bearlac returned to the standing stone. It was cool again, the sigil no longer glowing, but when he touched it, He felt warmth, not from the stone, but from his own chest. A kind of steady thrum that he recognized now as something more than just curiosity. Something ancient stirred within him, and it was calling him forward. As days passed, the patterns deepened. The skies seemed bluer than before, yet the stars appeared earlier, as though hurrying to watch. Shadows moved softer, the trees leaned closer. Animals, foxes, badgers, even a hawk, seemed to pause longer in his presence, as though seeing something they hadn't before. Berilak began to notice words whispered in dreams, names: Alatar, Palando, Kurumo, Iwendil, and Mithrandir. He wrote them down by candlelight in the journal he once used only for planting notes. His handwriting trembled, for he knew now what these names meant. They were the Istari, the Five, the ones who had come long ago from across the sea to guide and guard Middle-earth. But where were they now? Gandalf, he had heard, had gone west upon a white ship. Radagast had faded into the forest and was never seen again. The blue wizards, Alatar and Palando, were only mentioned in riddles and tales, if at all. And Saruman, Berilak did not speak that name aloud, but he remembered, and it made him wonder if such powers had walked this land, guiding, shaping, protecting. Then what did it mean now that they were gone? And why did he still feel their presence in the whisper of trees? One evening, just after a rain that had washed the sky clean, Berilak stood in the meadow behind his home. The moon was rising, a silver coin in a velvet sky, and the world seemed still. He pulled the feather from his pocket, holding it in the moonlight. It glowed softly, and then the wind stirred, a warm breeze though the night was cool. It moved in a slow spiral around him, and within its whisper he heard a voice, not loud, not commanding, just kind. Not lost, only returned. Berilak looked up, but no one was there, only the stars above, blinking like memory. That night, Berilak did not sleep easily, not from fear, but from something deeper, a restlessness wrapped in peace, a feeling like a hand gently pressing against a door long closed, now cracking open. He stood by his fire, the warm stone from the glade resting near the feather on his mantle. The air felt thick with meaning. He poured tea, though he barely tasted it, and sat quietly in his chair. And as the flames danced on the hearth, he whispered, "The wizards have not fallen." He didn't know where the words came from, but he believed them, because the wind was listening, and so was the world. The morning came cloaked in a silvery hush, as if the world itself were still dreaming. Berilak Bramblefoot stood at the edge of the meadow, the mist curling around his ankles like old memories. The grass was wet with dew, and each blade caught the morning light in a delicate shimmer. Somewhere beyond the hedgerows, a lark called softly, its song brief, thoughtful, as if it too sensed that this day would be different. He had not intended to walk far that morning, just enough to breathe in the cool air and perhaps gather a few sprigs of fresh thyme from the garden's edge. But something in the wind, in the pull of the earth beneath his feet, turned his steps toward the hidden trail beyond Bramblebank. That trail again, the one that hadn't existed until it did. The trees greeted him in their usual silent way, branches parting slightly overhead, their trunks rising like quiet sentinels. The path, narrow and soft beneath his boots, curved deeper into the woods than he remembered. He was certain of it, and yet he was not afraid. There was a peace here, a breathless sort of reverence that held the world still. After some time, minutes or hours, he couldn't tell, the path opened into a clearing he had never seen before. And there, in the center of the clearing, stood the ruin. It was no more than a low circle of broken stones, half sunken into moss and root. Yet something about it felt awake. Not haunted, no, but waiting, the kind of place that had not been forgotten by the land, even if every map had left it behind. Barilak stepped into the ring, the mist swirling at his heels, and the air changed. It was subtle, a pressure, a hush, a soft weight that pressed gently on the skin. He felt it most on his chest, right above the place where the feather rested in his inner pocket. Without thinking, he withdrew it. The moment it met the open air, it glowed, soft and sure, like moonlight seen through water. And then, a voice, not outside him, not inside him, but both. Not in words, but in memory. You are close. Barilak's breath caught. Not in fear, in wonder, he knelt at the center of the circle and ran his hands across the stone floor. Time had worn it smooth, but here and there, beneath the moss, he felt grooves, runes perhaps, or something older still. Then he saw it, a small notch in the stone, the exact shape of the feather's quill. Almost reverently, Barilak placed the feather into the notch. The world sighed, and light bloomed. It came not from the feather, but from the stone itself. Faint lines of silver traced outward from the center, branching like roots, like rivers, until the whole circle was aglow with gentle light. The mist retreated, curling back into the woods, as though the clearing had declared itself sacred. Barilak stood slowly, and there, just beyond the ring of stones, stood the figure, not the one he had seen before. This one was taller, robed in flowing blue-gray, the edges of his cloak stirring as though moved by a wind that did not touch the trees. His face was hidden beneath a deep hood, but his presence was undeniable. Not threatening, not entirely human, something older, wiser. Barilak did not speak. The figure raised a hand, not to ward off, but in greeting. And then, in a voice like wind through hollow stone, he spoke. "You've heard them, haven't you?" Barilak nodded, though he didn't quite understand. "The Istari," the figure continued, "not as they were remembered in song or scroll, but as they were, in essence, in truth." Barilak swallowed. I've seen glimpses." The figure stepped closer. His boots made no sound. The light from the stones reflected faintly in the folds of his robe. The wizards came to Middle-earth in shape and form, yes, but their spirits are older than memory. What fell was not only a body, what was lost was not entirely gone. Barilak frowned slightly. Then where are they? The figure turned slightly, motioning toward the trees beyond the clearing, between, beneath, beyond. He paused, and Barilak could feel the air hum around them. They linger in root and river, in song and silence, fragments, echoes, whispers. You are not the first to hear them. Barilak looked down at the glowing feather. And this? It once carried the blessing of Iwendil, the figure said softly. Radagast, as men knew him, he poured his strength into the living world, into bird and beast, leaf and stream. The feather remembers. Barilak felt his throat tighten. But if they gave everything, are they truly gone? The figure did not answer, not directly. Instead, he stepped into the circle of light and touched one of the glowing lines with a finger. The light shifted, images formed, a white-robed wizard walking through flame, a brown cloak vanishing into the forest, twin blue figures vanishing into the east, a staff falling into ash, and behind it all, the sound of the sea, waves unending. The figure turned back to Barilak. They chose to fade so others might rise. Barilak closed his eyes. He felt it now, truly felt it. The great current beneath the world, the ebb and flow of power and purpose. The Istari had not fallen as men fall in war or age. They had passed like seasons. Their echo was in the soil now, in starlight, in stories, in him. He opened his eyes. The figure was gone, but the light remained, and at the center of the circle, where the feather had been, now lay something new, a small silver pendant in the shape of a leaf. Barilak picked it up, and as his fingers closed around it, he felt warmth, peace, and purpose. He left the circle slowly, carrying the pendant close to his heart. The woods did not close behind him this time. They opened, guiding him forward toward something old and something beginning. That night, as he sat by his fire, the pendant resting on the mantle beside the feather and the warm stone, Barilak wrote only one sentence in his journal. They were never lost. Then, as the flames dimmed and the stars rose outside his window, he closed his eyes and listened. The wind carried names, softly, lovingly, and one of them was his. The candlelight flickered softly in Barilak's small round window, casting golden shadows that danced lazily across the wooden walls of his hobbit hole. Outside, the stars had begun to rise, one by one, quietly taking their places across the velvet sky. It was the kind of evening that asked nothing of the world, just peace and stillness and the slow, rhythmic breathing of night. Barilak sat curled in his chair beside the hearth, wrapped in a woven blanket the color of dandelion fluff. The fire crackled low, content to keep him company without demanding his attention. On the table before him lay 3 objects: the glowing feather, still faintly pulsing with memory, the silver pendant shaped like a leaf, and a small stone, warm to the touch, gifted by the riverbank long ago. He did not speak. He did not need to. Instead, he listened to the hush of the night, to the ticking of the clock, to the deep pulse of something old and vast that now beat just beneath his thoughts. Something had shifted inside him, gently, quietly, like a curtain lifting in a dream. The mystery was no longer distant. It was part of him. With a deep, quiet breath, Barilak leaned back and let his thoughts drift like leaves upon the brandywine. The memory of the stone circle returned first. The light, the warmth, the figure cloaked in blue-gray. He could still feel the air in that moment, heavy and holy, like standing within the hush of a song not yet sung. And then the vision, the white-robed figure in fire, the fading cloaks, the staff in ash, the sea. He had heard stories of the Istari since he was a child, but always as distant figures wrapped in legend and fog. Wizards who came from the west, bearing staffs and strange names. Great minds who walked beside kings and counseled elves, but they had never felt close. Until now he understood. They had not simply fallen, they had chosen to pass, to pour themselves back into the world, not in power, but in presence, in memory, in moss, in song, in people like him. He reached for the pendant again. The silver leaf was cool now, resting gently in his palm. He traced its veins with one fingertip, feeling something stir, not magic in the loud, spellbound sense, but something deeper, a remembering, a quiet vow. He whispered into the fire, almost without meaning to. "Thank you." And the flame, small and steady, bowed low, as if in acknowledgement. Barilak rose and stepped outside. The grass was cool underfoot, and the air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle and night soil. He walked slowly up the narrow path that led to the hill behind his garden, the one with the bench beneath the old beech tree. There, under the watchful sky, he sat. He gazed westward, and he listened. The stars above him shimmered with a soft brilliance, their light older than even the wizards themselves. Somewhere, far beyond sight or knowing, lay the sea, and beyond that, Valinor, the undying lands, the place from which the Istari had once come, and perhaps to which they had now returned. Barilak closed his eyes and imagined it, not as a place of golden towers and eternal light, but as a whisper in the heart, a longing that had always been there, quiet and persistent, like a song you can't quite remember, but know you once loved. The westward pull, the gentle ache, the elves had felt it, the wizards too, and now, a hobbit. It didn't matter that he didn't know why. It didn't matter that no grand quest awaited him, or that no council had chosen him for greatness. The knowing was enough. The feeling that he was part of something older and wider than even the green hills of the Shire. The realization came not like thunder, but like morning mist, settling in layers across his mind. The Istari had not failed. They had fulfilled their purpose, not in defeating Sauron with strength or flame, but in planting seeds, in soil, in song, in small lives that would carry on when the great names were forgotten. Barilak felt a tear slip down his cheek. It surprised him. He hadn't known such quiet truths could move the heart so deeply. And yet, there it was. He thought of Radagast and the birds that still danced through the trees, of Gandalf and the echoes of his laughter in every firelit gathering, of the blue wizards wandering unseen in the east, scattering starlight into forgotten corners of the world. They were not gone. They were stories now, living stories, and somehow he was one of them. A gentle wind brushed the top of the beech tree, rustling its leaves like pages being turned, and in the sound, Barilak thought he heard something faint, a melody, a name, a promise. He stayed there for a long while, letting the peace of it fill every corner of his being. Eventually, the stars began to blur at the edges. The moon dipped low, and the world exhaled again. Bearlac stood, the silver leaf now around his neck, resting just above his heart. He made his way back to his warm little home, the path soft beneath his feet. Inside, the hearth had gone quiet, but the warmth remained. He refilled the kettle and set it over the embers, humming a tune he didn't know he knew. He wrote again in his journal that night. Not much, just this: the wizards did not leave us. They became the song beneath the world. He closed the book, and as he drifted to sleep beneath a woolen quilt, the pendant glowing faintly beside him, he felt it again, that gentle tug, that quiet magic. The road was long, but the way had begun. And in the hush of that softest hour, Bearlac Bramblefoot, small hobbit of the quiet hills, dreamed not of dragons or battles, but of stars that sang, and wizards who became the wind. Dawn crept softly across the hills of the Shire, spilling warm honey light over dewdrops and sleepy leaves. Birds greeted the day with hesitant chirps, not quite ready to fill the morning with full song. Bearlac Bramblefoot stirred gently from slumber, blinking up at the wooden beams above his bed, where dust motes danced in golden shafts of sunlight. He stretched slowly, letting his breath ease into the waking world. The silver leaf pendant rested against his chest, still cool, still humming quietly with memory. And though the fire had long gone out, warmth lingered in the room, as if the night itself had wrapped him gently and remained behind just for a moment longer. That day, Bearlac did not tend his garden, nor did he reshelve books or polish the brass lanterns that hung in his hallway. Instead, with a soft and certain purpose, he packed a small satchel with bread, dried apples, a flask of cool spring water, and the old leather-bound map that had belonged to his uncle. Then he slipped on his cloak, pinned the pendant beneath it, and stepped out into the world. He did not know precisely where he was going, only that the road was calling, and he was ready to walk it. As he passed through the meadow gate, he felt the sky open above him like a slow blooming flower. The breeze carried a faint scent of lavender and moss, and somewhere far off, perhaps imagined, came the sound of distant bells, light and lilting, like laughter folded into the wind. He walked through the green folds of the land, where tree roots curled like sleeping beasts, and streams babbled to themselves in forgotten languages. He paused often, not in hesitation, but in reverence. Each stone, each leaf, seemed touched by memory, as though the earth itself was remembering along with him. It was near dusk, on the second day of his walking, that Bearlac first saw the figure ahead, a silhouette beneath a swaying birch tree, still, waiting. As he drew near, he saw it was an elf, tall and cloaked in moon gray, with hair that shimmered like starlight through a waterfall. The elf was gazing at a small pool where the reflection of the evening sky rippled gently in the water. Bearlac slowed, hesitant, but the elf turned with a smile that was both old and new. "You have the look of one who carries memory," the elf said in a voice as soft as falling snow, "and you walk as one who listens." Bearlac bowed slightly, unsure of what to say, but the elf only gestured to the ground beside him. Sit, if you will. The pool welcomes all stories. And so they sat together in silence, watching the stars come to life in the sky and their mirrored twins stir in the still water below. I am Thalineth, said the elf after a time. Of those who linger, Bearlac nodded gently. I am Bearlac Bramblefoot, of those who garden. Thalineth laughed, a sound like the clinking of wind chimes. Then you are wise, for those who tend the earth know the deep songs of the world. They spoke for hours, though neither marked the time. Bearlac shared what he had seen, the vision in the stone circle, the feeling of ancient eyes watching, the sense that something long buried was stirring gently beneath the roots of the world. And Thalineth listened, offering neither answers nor riddles, only presence. At length, the elf reached into the folds of his cloak and drew forth a small wooden token, a circle carved with 7 tiny stars. The Istari left signs, he said, markers in the land. They knew their end would not be a loud thunder, but a quiet dispersal. Some of us still remember where those signs are hidden. Bearlac turned the token over in his hands. It felt warm, alive. What do I do with it? He asked softly. Thalineth smiled. You carry it, and you notice what it notices. They parted beneath the stars, the elf vanishing like mist into the folds of twilight, and Bearlac walked on, the token pressed against his heart. The days passed gently. Each footstep was a verse, each moment a quiet note in the long song of the road. One morning, as the path curved through a forest of copper beech, Bearlac heard a voice, low, steady, and humming a tune that seemed older than any he'd ever heard. There, seated on a mossy stump, was a ranger, cloaked in green and brown, with eyes like riverstone and hands scarred from time and toil. He looked up, offered a nod, and gestured toward the fire he'd built in a circle of flat stones. You look like one who's wandered far, with only questions for company, the ranger said. Sit, the road tastes better with stew and silence. Bearlac sat, grateful. The stew was simple, roots and herbs, boiled in a blackened pot, but it carried a richness that made the heart sigh. They ate in companionable quiet, watching the light shift between the trees. The ranger, who called himself Halvin, was not one for long speeches, but he spoke when the fire was low, and Bearlac had finished his second bowl. There was a time, Halvin murmured, when those who bore staffs walked beside us, not above, not beyond, but beside. They did not fight with fire, though they could. They guided, nudged, carried heavy things we couldn't name. He reached into his pack and pulled out a worn scrap of parchment, faded and torn. Upon it, drawn in faint ink, was a shape, a 7-pointed star nested within a circle. They left these behind, he said, reminders, not of their power, but of their purpose. Bearlac studied it. It matched the token. He felt something shift within him, a puzzle piece falling gently into place, not solving the mystery, but showing that the picture was larger than he'd imagined. You're not the first hobbit to walk westward, Halvin added as he stirred the fire, but you may be among the few to do so with your eyes wide open. That night, they shared stories, not of battles or beasts, but of rain remembered, of songs hummed by grandmothers, of stars that seemed to whisper things when no one else was listening. And in the telling, Bearlac learned something unspoken, that to walk the path of the wizards was not to seek power, but to carry presence, to be a quiet guardian of what still mattered. The next morning, as the mist curled along the trail and birds began their tentative chorus, Halvin gave Bearlac a smooth river stone. "For your pocket," he said, "to remind you the weight of the world can be beautiful too." Bearlac bowed low in gratitude. He walked on, sometimes alone, sometimes watched by curious eyes in the trees. And sometimes, when the wind caught the right note, he swore he heard voices, familiar, ageless, laughing softly just beyond sight. It was not a grand fellowship that traveled with him, but it was enough. One elf, one ranger, one hobbit with a silver leaf, a wooden token, and a heart quietly opening to wonder. And in their gentle passing, the world itself seemed to lean closer, to listen, to remember. Night had come softly over the hills, not with fanfare, nor with shadowy menace, but with a hush, like a blanket gently drawn across the sky. One by one, the stars emerged, timid and twinkling, each finding its place in the grand dome above. The wind, too, quieted into a whisper, rustling only the outermost leaves of the canopy, as if to say, "Listen well, the old songs begin." Bearlac Bramblefoot sat beside a low campfire, its flames dancing in sleepy orange spirals. The fire didn't roar, it barely crackled. Instead, it offered warmth in a hush, just enough to hold the chill at bay and to cast soft flickers across the moss-covered stones surrounding the clearing. Thalineth the elf had returned for the night, and Halvin, the Dunedain ranger, had joined them again as well. The three sat in a triangle around the fire, each cloaked in their own quietude, but bound now by a gentle thread of shared memory and silent trust. Above them, the stars hung lower than usual, or so it seemed, as if they leaned closer, not to observe, but to remember. Thalineth broke the silence first. "There is a story," he said softly, his voice almost musical, "older than Lothlorien's golden leaves, older than the white tree of Numenor, even older than the 7 stars of Elendil." Bearlac leaned forward slightly, his hands wrapped around a mug of tea that smelled faintly of elderflower and mint. "A story of what?" he asked. Thalineth's eyes reflected the stars like still water. "Of when the world was young and fire had not yet learned to rise." He paused and then began, not like a performer, but like a keeper of memory, reciting not to impress, but to preserve. "In the time before time," Thalineth said, "the valor shaped Arda as one shapes a bowl from clay. The mountains were raised, the seas carved deep, and the forests whispered with the breath of Yavanna. But there came a shadow, not loud nor sudden, but creeping, curious and cold." "Melkor," Halvin muttered. Thalineth nodded. "Indeed, and so the Valar, in their wisdom, foresaw that a time would come when creatures of Arda, elves, men, even hobbits, would face trials that no sword could pierce and no wall could shield, and so they sent the Istari. Barilak's heart skipped. He knew that name now. "The wizards," he whispered. "5," said Thalineth. Though only 3 walked plainly beneath the sun. Gandalf, who carried light, Saruman, who sought order, and Radagast, who listened to the earth. The other 2 vanished into the east, and even our songs are hesitant to name them. Halvin stirred the fire absently with a stick. "Do you believe they fell?" he asked. Thalineth looked upward. "Or perhaps they changed," the elf said, "as trees become forest and rivers become sea. Not every fall is a failure, and not every change is loss." The wind stirred then, only slightly, and a long, low howl echoed from far across the hills. It was not a beast, but a memory. Barilak shivered, not in fear, but in awe. "What happened to them?" he asked, "to Gandalf and the rest?" Thalineth gazed into the fire, as if drawing the answer from the coals. "They completed their task," he said, "or so we thought." Halvin tilted his head. "You mean the War of the Ring?" "Yes," the elf replied. "Gandalf cast down the darkness. Saruman was unmade by his own pride. Radagast simply faded into the woods. But here is where the lore frays." Barilak leaned closer. Thalineth's voice fell into a hush. "There are those who believe," he said, "that the Istari were not meant to vanish, that they left behind pieces, echoes, placed carefully throughout Middle-earth. Not tools, not weapons, but reminders." "Of what?" Barilak breathed. The elf's gaze rose to the stars. "Of their purpose." The fire was low now, glowing more than burning, and the night deepened into velvet. It was Halvin who spoke next, unrolling a bundle of old fabric and revealing a narrow flute carved from a single piece of blackwood. "I heard a tale," he said, "in the ruins of Amun-Sul, where winds speak louder than men. A tale told in breath and whistle, not in words." He raised the flute, not to perform, but to echo something older. The notes he played were simple, 3 rising, 2 falling. They circled like a lullaby and drifted out into the trees. And when he finished, the air seemed heavier, as though the song had settled into the soil itself. Barilak's voice was small when he asked, "What was it?" Halvin looked at him, then down at the flute. "A signal," he said to be known only to the Istari. When played at the right place under the right stars, it calls memory awake. Barilak touched the pendant at his chest, the silver leaf now warm again. The fire gave a single pop, and Thalineth spoke once more. "There is another tale," the elf said gently, "one told only by the trees of Lorien." He reached into his satchel and pulled out a small piece of parchment, so old its edges crumbled softly in the wind. "It tells of the White Road," he said, unrolling it, "a path that cannot be seen, only felt." Barilak frowned. "Where does it lead?" "To a place where magic rests," Thalineth replied. "Not the magic of spells and sparks, but the kind that binds stories together, where the Istari left their last gifts." The elf pointed to the sky. "Follow the wane," he whispered, "and when the stars above form a perfect arc, walk west toward the horizon's breath." The parchment showed no map, only lines that danced in circles, forming 7 points around an empty center. 7 stars, 7 stories. Barilak's voice barely rose above the wind. Do you think I'm meant to find it? Halvin smiled, leaning back on his elbow. I think you already have. They sat in silence once more. The stars shimmered overhead, brighter now, as if awakened by the telling. The forest listened, and the fire held its breath. Barilak, nestled in his blanket, watched the flames flicker lower and lower until they were just embers, glowing softly like tiny eyes blinking slowly to sleep. And then he heard it, faint, distant, but unmistakable. A whisper in the wind, not words, not voices, but presence. The kind that filled the heart and left the mind still. He looked toward Thaloneth and Halvin, but they were already resting, eyes closed, expressions calm. And so he lay back on the soft moss, the silver pendant warm against his skin, the token of 7 stars in his palm, and the stars singing lullabies above. He did not dream of battles. He did not see fire or shadow, only white ships sailing across starlit seas, and the road winding gently west, always west, toward the edge of memory and beyond. The stars had shifted since the journey began, and the hush of twilight once more rested gently across Middle-earth. Soft clouds drifted like whispers across the face of the moon, and the trees of the ancient woodlands swayed slowly, as though responding to the tale that had nearly reached its final verse. Eleanor stood now upon a wide glade, veiled in silver dew, with the scent of moss and starlight drifting around her. The fireflies had returned, though fewer in number, and hovered near her path as if guiding her one final time. In her hands, she held the staff, not hers, but one given, or perhaps returned, smooth with age and imbued with threads of light barely visible to the eye. It thrummed gently beneath her touch, like a lullaby sung long ago in another tongue. She had followed the trail through memory and story, starlit forest and mist-covered stones, but it was here, beneath the arching boughs of forgotten trees near the border of Dol Guldur, that the truth waited. Not a truth to battle, but to understand. Not a foe, but a memory lost in the folds of time. The air here was heavier, not dark, not threatening, but reverent, ancient. She knelt in the glade and rested the staff gently upon the ground, and the earth remembered, like mist parting before the dawn. Visions stirred in the clearing, not sharp, but soft as candlelight. Shadows formed in graceful arcs of color and sound. She saw them, the 5, the Istari, in white and brown, blue and gray, shapes that drifted just at the edge of clarity. They stood not as warriors, but as watchers, as guardians. Gandalf, radiant in light, stood foremost, though his face bore both joy and sorrow. Radagast, kind and moss-touched, seemed to reach toward the woodland animals near Eleanor's feet. And further still, cloaked in mystery and sky-colored robes, the blue wizards lingered in the east, gazing toward a land beyond even her imagining. Saruman stood apart, proud and sharp, but even his shadow had softened here in memory. They had not fallen in a blaze of glory, nor in the thunder of battle, Eleanor realized. They had faded, some by choice, others by sorrow, and some, perhaps, had simply stepped too far into the world and forgotten their way back. It was not failure. It was becoming. The Istari had been sent not to rule, but to guide. And in guiding, they had poured their spirit into the lands, into the people, into the stories whispered by firelight. Their power was never in dominance. It was in presence, in soft nudges, in listening. And though they had vanished from the world's eyes, their essence lingered in Eleanor's dreams, in the rustle of trees, in the firefly's glow, and the comforting crackle of a fire on a long night. A warmth rose in her chest, not of magic, but of recognition. She had not come here to wield the power of the wizards, nor to restore them. She had come to remember them, and in remembering, she helped the world remember too. The staff shimmered once, its glow deepening, then slowly dimmed until it was just a staff again. But in Eleanor's heart, the light remained. She stood, and the glade sighed with her. Somewhere in the boughs above, an owl stirred and hooted gently, and a breeze passed through the grass like the exhale of something ancient and kind. The road back to the Shire stretched softly before her. She walked slowly, but not hesitantly. Every step away from Dol Guldur was a step into peace, not because the mystery was solved like a riddle, but because it had been honored like a story. When she returned, the fields rolled in gold and green, and Bag End's round windows glowed warm in the dusk. She paused by her gate, her cloak dusted with leaves and light, and looked up at the stars. One twinkled brighter than the rest, perhaps a gift. Inside, her chair waited by the fire, and on the table beside it, the pages of an old book lay open. She smiled, not because she had all the answers, but because she now knew the questions were part of the beauty. She settled in with tea and ink and began to write, not a tale of might, nor a tale of glory, but a tale of gentle power, and how even the fading of the great can leave behind a warmth that never truly dies. Outside, the night deepened, but in Eleanor's hearth, a gentle light burned on, steady and soft. And somewhere far away, in a place beyond wind and sea, a white ship drifted through the mist, carrying the last sigh of magic into the west. But the echo would remain, always, in the firelight, in the stars, in the soft lull of bedtime stories, just like this one. Hello again, my sleepy travelers. As the stars now shine quietly above the hills of the Shire, and the fire beside you burns low with a warm orange glow, let us take a deep, calming breath together. You've wandered far this evening, gently carried through the ancient forests and forgotten halls of Middle-earth, where the last memories of the Istari whisper through leaves and starlight. Eleanor's journey was never one of might or conquest. It was a gentle walk through longing and memory, a search not for power, but for understanding. She did not awaken the wizards from some enchanted sleep, nor call them back to the world with loud spells or blinding light. Instead, she listened, she remembered, and in that remembrance, the story of the Istari found its final breath. We too have walked that quiet path tonight, through firefly-lit woods and twilight glades, past old stories told beneath the stars. And now, as the journey comes to a close, You may feel a stillness in your chest, a soft warmth, as if some small lantern of peace has been lit within you. Because stories like these, the ones full of ancient whispers and gentle truths, don't need grand endings. They simply linger, like a familiar song hummed long after the music has stopped. The powers of the wizards were never in their staffs or their cloaks. Their magic was in presence, in compassion, in the quiet courage to guide without ruling. And now, that same magic rests in you, in your quiet moments, in your own gentle choices, in the way you listen, just as Eleanor did. So rest now, little one. Let the winds of Lothlorien carry your dreams tonight. Let the soft voice of the forest lull you into stillness. Somewhere, just beyond the veil of sleep, Gandalf walks under starlight. Radagast speaks to the birds in the trees, and the last of the blue wizards smile as the moon reflects off distant eastern seas. You are safe now. The story has been told. The hearth is warm. The road can wait. Good night, my dear traveler. Sleep well, and may the gentle magic of the Istari guide your dreams.